Welcome, Dark Night Tales. Tonight's story is not just dark, it's buried in history's silence and suffering. Imagine surviving 50 brutal years of slavery, finally tasting freedom, and stepping into an abandoned house you believe will be your safe haven, only to uncover a secret so horrifying it should never have existed. Before we begin, tell us in the comments where you're watching from, and make sure you subscribe, because every story you hear here is built on deep research, real historical records, and countless hours spent uncovering truths the past tried to erase. Now let's step inside the house that have stayed sealed. For 50 long years, the woman who would one day be known only as the widow lived a life stripped of name, choice, and mercy. Born into slavery, she never knew what freedom felt like, not as a child, not as a young woman, not even as a wife. Her days began before sunrise and ended long after darkness swallowed the fields. Every breath she took belonged to someone else. She learned early that survival did not come from rebellion, but from silence. She watched others cry out and vanish. She watched families torn apart and learned to bury grief so deeply that even memory felt dangerous. She married in bondage, not by law, but by whispered promises under the cover of night. Her husband became her only refuge, until he was sold away without warning, leaving her a widow long before death made it official. From that moment on, she endured alone. Years blurred together in punishment, labor, and quiet obedience. Yet inside her lived something unbroken, the ability to observe, remember, and wait. She memorized faces, rooms, and voices. She listened when masters thought no one heard. She survived not because she was spared cruelty, but because she learned how to endure it. When freedom finally came, it did not arrive with celebration. It arrived with exhaustion, loss, and a body worn thin by time. At nearly 70 years old, she stepped into a world that had moved on without her. No family waited. No home existed. All she carried was memory and the weight of 50 stolen years. That was why owning a house, even an abandoned one, meant everything to her. She wasn't just buying shelter. She was claiming proof that her life had not been erased. What she did not know was that the past she survived was already waiting for her. Inside those walls, freedom did not feel the way she had imagined it during those endless nights in bondage. There were no celebrations, no apologies, no justice handed down for the years stolen from her life. It came quietly, almost carelessly, as if 50 years of suffering could be erased with a few spoken words and signed papers. When the gates finally opened, she stepped out not as a young woman ready to begin again, but as an elderly widow with a body bent by labor and a spirit scarred by loss. The world beyond the plantation felt unfamiliar and hostile. Towns were loud, faces were suspicious, and freedom itself carried a cruel irony. She was free, but she was alone. No land had been given to her. No compensation offered for the decades of unpaid labor. She had no savings, no protection, and no family left to claim her. Every choice, where to sleep, what to eat, whom to trust, became a new kind of burden. Freedom demanded decisions she had never been allowed to make. Worse still were the invisible chains she carried within. Loud noises made her flinch. Authority figures still tightened her chest with fear. At night, she woke from dreams of commands being shouted and footsteps approaching. Slavery had ended on paper, but it lived on in her mind and body. The cost of survival was lifelong vigilance. Yet even in that fragile state, she made one decision that mattered more than all the rest. She would never belong to anyone again. She would own something, no matter how small, no matter how broken. That resolve led her to the abandoned house. To her it represented dignity, independence, and a place where no one could give orders. But freedom, she would soon learn, has a way of uncovering truths long buried, and some prices are paid only after the chains are gone. With freedom came an impossible reality. No one was waiting to offer her shelter. The town had no interest in an elderly freed widow with no money, no family name, and no protection. Boarding houses turned her away, employers saw her age before her humanity, and even churches spoke kindly while offering nothing permanent. Each night spent sleeping in borrowed corners reminded her that freedom, without a place to belong, was just another form of uncertainty. The abandoned house sat at the edge of town, half swallowed by weeds and silence. Most people avoided it. Children dared each other to run past it, and adults lowered their voices when its name was mentioned. To the widow, though, it represented something different. It was unwanted, just like her. Broken, forgotten, and left behind by time. And because no one wanted it, no one could take it from her. The price was low, almost suspiciously so. The papers were simple, rushed, as if the town wanted the property erased from memory. She did not ask many questions. After 50 years of being denied ownership of even her own body, the idea of legally possessing land, even land in ruin, felt like a victory. She believed walls, no matter how cracked, could still protect her. What drew her most was the silence. No overseer's whistle, no shouting, no footsteps behind her. The house promised solitude, and solitude felt like safety. She imagined fixing one room, lighting a small fire, and finally sleeping without fear of being dragged away before dawn. But abandonment often means more than neglect. It means something was left unfinished. Something people chose not to face. As she crossed the threshold for the first time, carrying everything she owned in a single bundle, she didn't realize she wasn't entering a new beginning. She was stepping into a place where the past had been sealed away and waiting. Before the widow ever stepped inside the abandoned house, the town already knew its story, or at least the version they dared to whisper. Older residents crossed the street to avoid walking past it. Shopkeepers fell silent when its location was mentioned. Children were warned that bad things happened to those who lingered near it after dark. Yet no one spoke openly, as if naming the truth might give it life again. The house had been abandoned for decades, long before the war, long before freedom came. People said no one could stay there for long. Families who tried left suddenly, often in the middle of the night. Some claimed they heard noises, heavy thuds beneath the floor, muffled cries carried by the walls, footsteps moving where no one should have been. Others said the house carried a smell that never faded, no matter how long it stood empty. There were darker rumors, too. The land it stood on once belonged to a powerful man known for cruelty even by the standards of his time. Locals hinted that the house was not just a home, but a place where people were hidden, punished, and erased. Records were missing, names were forgotten, and those who knew more chose silence over explanation. When the widow asked about the house, answers were short and uneasy. Some warned her not to move in. Others shrugged and said it was cursed. No one tried to stop the sale. In fact, the transaction felt rushed, as if the town wanted responsibility for that place gone as quickly as possible. What the locals feared wasn't superstition. It was memory. The house stood as a reminder of things done in secret, things that never faced judgment. And by choosing it, the widow unknowingly stepped into a story the town had spent generations trying to bury. The first night in the house was silent, but not peaceful. As darkness settled, the widow sensed something was wrong long before she could explain it. The air inside felt heavy, colder than the night outside, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. When she lit her small oil lamp, the flame flickered unnaturally, bending as though moved by an unseen presence. She tried to sleep in the front room, choosing the spot that felt least damaged by time. Yet the floorboards creaked even when she lay still. Not the soft groans of an old house, but sharp, deliberate sounds, as if weight was shifting just beyond her sight. At one point, she was certain she heard breathing that did not belong to her. Slow, controlled, close. Then came the smells. A damp, metallic odor seeped into the room, rising from beneath the floor. It reminded her of places she had known in bondage, spaces where light never reached and people were taken but never returned. Her chest tightened, and memories she thought buried clawed their way back. Near midnight, the lamp dimmed suddenly. In its fading glow, she noticed markings on the wall she had missed earlier, scratches etched deep into the wood, some forming shapes that looked disturbingly like tallies. Dozens of them, maybe more. Someone had been counting time here, or counting lives. She told herself it was fear, exhaustion, imagination born from a lifetime of trauma. Still, she did not sleep. She sat awake until dawn, wrapped in her shawl, listening to the house settle, and realizing it never truly went quiet. By morning, she understood one thing with terrifying clarity. This house was not empty, and whatever remained inside had been waiting far longer than she had. It was on the second day that the widow noticed something the night had hidden from her. While tracing the interior walls in daylight, she felt a strange unevenness behind the plaster, one section colder, thicker, wrong. Old instincts sharpened by survival told her this was not ordinary damage. Houses, like people, reveal their secrets when you know how to listen. Behind a warped cabinet in the back room, she found it a narrow seam in the wall, almost invisible beneath layers of grime and peeling paint. With effort, she pried it open. The sound that followed was not the crack of wood, but the release of air, stale, trapped, and heavy, as if the space behind it had been sealed off deliberately. A hidden room emerged, barely large enough to stand in. No windows, no furniture. Just iron rings bolted into the walls, and deep grooves carved into the floor where something, or someone, had been dragged repeatedly. The smell from the first night grew stronger here, unmistakable now. This was not storage. This was confinement. As she searched further, she discovered more sealed spaces, small compartments beneath stairwells, behind false walls, even under the floorboards. Each one told the same story in different forms, chains embedded into beams, scratch marks at human height, dried stains that time had darkened but never erased. These rooms had been hidden with intention. Someone had gone to great lengths to ensure they would not be found. The widow stood frozen, understanding settling in with horrifying clarity. This house had not simply witnessed cruelty, it had been built around it. Designed to conceal suffering, to erase evidence, to make screams disappear. And as she backed away from the hidden chamber, one thought cut deeper than all the rest. The people who had been kept here were never meant to leave. As the widow moved deeper into the house, she began to notice objects that should not have been there, items too personal, too deliberate, to be mere remnants of abandonment. In one of the hidden rooms, partially buried beneath debris, she found a child's shoe. It was small, worn thin at the sole, the leather cracked from age. No family had ever lived here long enough to explain it. The realization tightened her throat. Scattered nearby were rusted shackles, their hinges stiff but unmistakable. Unlike the tools of labor she had known all her life, these were designed for restraint, not work. Some were sized for wrists no thicker than a woman's thumb. Others bore crude marks, notches carved into the metal as if someone had counted days or punishments by hand. She uncovered scraps of cloth wedged between floorboards, torn and knotted into shapes that looked like desperate attempts at signaling. One piece still held a faint trace of embroidery, suggesting it had once been part of a Sunday garment, something worn with dignity before being ripped away. These were not trash. They were traces of lives interrupted. In a corner of the smallest sealed space, she found something that made her knees weaken, a small wooden token etched with initials. She recognized the style immediately. Enslaved people often carved such marks to remember names they were forbidden to speak aloud. Holding it, she felt a sickening certainty. Some of the suffering recorded in this house mirrored the world she had survived. Each object whispered the same truth. People had lived, suffered, and vanished here. Their stories were never written down, their names never recorded. And yet, through these forgotten belongings, they were still speaking, asking to be seen, to be acknowledged, to be remembered. The house was no longer just a place of horror. It was a grave without headstones. What the widow uncovered next went far beyond rumor or suspicion. It was proof. In the deepest hidden space beneath the house, where even daylight refused to enter, she found markings that no passing of time could erase. The walls were scarred with handprints, pressed so hard into the surface that the shapes remained, as if desperation itself had been burned into the structure. Some prints were small, too small. Children had been here. The floor told its own story. Grooves ran in uneven paths, worn down by repeated movement, by bodies dragged back and forth again and again. In one corner, she noticed a shallow pit filled with hardened earth, stained dark. The sight stole her breath. She had seen those stains before in places no one ever spoke of, places where pain was meant to stay hidden. Most disturbing of all were the sounds the space carried. When she stood still, she saw she could hear faint echoes, low moans, muffled sobs, the desperate scraping of nails against wood. Whether memory, imagination, or something worse, the effect was the same. The house felt alive with suffering that had never been acknowledged, never mourned. She realized then that this was not just cruelty, it was systematic, organized. Someone had used this house as a place to break people quietly, away from witnesses, a place where screams were absorbed by walls and erased by secrecy. What she was standing in was evidence of crimes that history had chosen to forget. And in that moment, the widow understood something chilling. This house was not abandoned because it was empty. It was abandoned because it held too much truth. As the widow continued exploring, a terrifying realization began to take shape. This house was connected to her own life in ways she could never have imagined. The scratches on the walls, the hidden chambers, and the personal objects left behind all mirrored the pain she had endured for 50 long years. The patterns of suffering, the small tokens of defiance, even the faint marks on the floors, all of it resonated with memories she had buried deep within her mind. She noticed a worn chain in one of the hidden rooms, small enough to fit a woman's wrist. Its shape and weight reminded her of the very shackles she had worn as a young girl in the fields. The echo of its cold metal against the floor brought back the sound of commands barked by her overseers. Another corner revealed faint carvings in the wood, symbols of hope, survival, and defiance. She had carved the same symbols herself decades ago, teaching herself to endure through secret reminders of strength and resilience. It dawned on her that this house might have been used by the same people who had owned the plantation where she spent her youth. The very walls seemed to whisper her story, or at least a story that was eerily similar. Objects she discovered, a child's shoe, scraps of cloth, and carved tokens, were artifacts of lives broken under the same system that had held her captive. The connection was more than coincidence. The house was a mirror of the world she had survived, a place where the horrors of her past had been replicated and preserved. For the first time since gaining her freedom, she felt the weight of history pressing down upon her, not as an abstract concept, but as a living, breathing presence. The house was not just a structure. It was a repository of memories, both her own and those of countless others who had suffered in silence. Standing in that darkened room, the widow understood the cruel irony. She had sought refuge in this abandoned place, believing it would finally be her sanctuary. Instead, she had stumbled into a physical echo of the life she had just escaped, proof that the horrors of the past were not easily left behind, and that some secrets demand to be confronted, no matter how long they have been hidden. As days passed, the widow grew accustomed to the creaks, drafts, and eerie silence of the abandoned house, but a growing unease lingered in the corners of her mind. It was on the third night, when the wind howled through the broken windows, that she truly understood she was not alone. At first, it was subtle, a shadow that didn't match the flicker of her lamp, a cold draft that moved in unnatural patterns, brushing against her skin in ways no open window could explain. Then came the sound, a faint scuffling from beneath the floorboards, like feet dragging across dust and debris. She froze, heart hammering, every muscle in her body alert. The noises weren't random. They followed a rhythm, deliberate, purposeful, almost like someone or something was pacing, waiting, watching. Her instincts, honed over decades of surviving cruelty and betrayal, screamed at her. She grabbed a piece of firewood and crept through the hallway, the floorboards groaning under her weight. As she entered one of the hidden chambers she had uncovered earlier, The temperature dropped sharply. Her breath fogged in the air. Then she saw a shadow moving in the corner, too large to belong to a rat, too deliberate to be imagined. Panic surged, but so did a strange sense of recognition. The presence wasn't attacking, it was observing. The widow's mind raced. Could this be the lingering memory of those who had suffered here? Or was someone else hiding in the house, waiting to continue the cycle of cruelty? Every instinct told her to flee, yet she could not tear her eyes away. That night, the realization settled like a weight on her chest. The house had never truly been empty. It had always held witnesses, survivors, or spirits of the past, quietly inhabiting the shadows. For the widow, freedom had come at a steep price, the cost of confronting not only her own past, but the echoes of countless others who had been trapped here. She understood, with chilling clarity, that she would have to face whatever haunted this house if she wanted to claim it as her own. And in that moment, she knew her journey was no longer about finding shelter, it was about surviving what had been waiting for her all along. After days of cautious exploration, the widow finally pieced together the horrifying truth that the house had been holding for decades. It wasn't just abandoned, it had been a secret site of unimaginable cruelty, a place where enslaved people had been confined, tortured, and erased from memory. The hidden rooms, the shackles, the personal belongings, all were evidence of lives stolen, and now, by stepping into the house, she had stumbled directly into a preserved history of suffering that mirrored her own. The most damning discovery came when she uncovered a small, hidden ledger beneath a loose floorboard in the largest chamber. Though brittle with age, its pages contained meticulous records, names, dates, and brief notes about individuals brought here. The entries spoke of children separated from their mothers, men punished for minor disobedience, and women confined in these secret chambers for weeks at a time. Some notes were crudely annotated, with tally marks showing the duration of imprisonment or the number of lashes administered. Each page screamed in silence, revealing crimes that had gone unpunished for decades. As she read, the widow recognized patterns that mirrored her own life, the forced labor, the separations, the constant surveillance, the enforced silence. She realized that the horrors she had survived were not isolated incidents. They were part of a systematic cruelty that had been perpetuated and hidden behind closed doors. The house had been a place where the powerful exercised complete control, leaving no witnesses and erasing evidence until now. The revelation changed her forever. She understood that her own freedom, gained after 50 years, carried with it a responsibility. She was no longer just a survivor. She had become the keeper of these hidden stories. The house had offered her a sanctuary, yes, but it had also entrusted her with a mission, to bear witness to what had been done here, to honor the lives of those who could never speak, and to ensure that their suffering would not be forgotten. The widow stepped out of the hidden chamber, her hands trembling, her mind reeling. She was no longer entering the house as a passive observer. She was entering as someone who now knew the truth, a truth so dark and harrowing that it would shape her remaining days. Her purpose, and her understanding of freedom itself. The house, once merely a structure of wood and stone, had become a living testament to history and she was its reluctant guardian. The final, chilling revelation came as the widow pieced together why no one had lived in the house for decades, and why the town had hurriedly sold it to her without question. The truth was that the house was abandoned not by accident, but by collective fear and guilt. Those who had once owned it, or who had known what occurred inside, had deliberately erased themselves from its story. The horrors committed within its walls were too terrible to confront, and too shameful to acknowledge. Records had been destroyed, witnesses intimidated, and the house left to decay. Even after the abolition of slavery, the stigma of what had happened there lingered. Local families avoided it, townsfolk whispered about it only in hushed tones, and children were warned away. The land itself had become a symbol of suffering so profound that society preferred to ignore it rather than face the truths it contained. The very architecture of the house, its hidden rooms, false floors, and sealed compartments, was a testament to the deliberate erasure of human lives, meticulously designed so that no one could uncover what had truly happened. For the widow, the abandonment was a cruel irony. The very structure she had hoped would provide sanctuary was steeped in the history of cruelty and concealment. But it also explained why, despite decades of neglect, the house had remained largely intact. Its silence preserved the secrets of the past, waiting for someone brave or desperate enough to confront them. She realized that she now held a rare, terrible responsibility. The house's previous owners had abandoned it to protect themselves from guilt and consequence. She could not do the same. By stepping into it, she had entered a space where history refused to die quietly. The house demanded acknowledgement, remembrance, and testimony. For the widow, understanding why it was abandoned meant that survival alone was no longer enough. She had to bear witness, to honor the lives that had been hidden, and to carry the stories of suffering into the light. In that moment, the abandoned house transformed from a mere structure of wood and stone into a living monument to endurance, injustice, and memory, a place where the past could no longer remain buried, and where the widow's own freedom intertwined with the obligation to never forget.